Commander Jake Mitchell sat in the communications center of Earth's Defense Command when the emergency signal came through. His coffee cup still warm on the metal desk beside him. The red light on the main monitor blinked rapidly. A warning pattern that meant serious trouble somewhere in the galaxy. The signal came from the Sovereign Alliance of Peaceful Worlds. Beings who had looked down on humans for decades and called them crude barbarians who lived on a dangerous death world. The message was scrambled and urgent. Jake had to run it through 3 translation programs before the meaning became clear. An armada was coming, a force called the Void Collective that devoured everything in its path. Entire civilizations had already fallen to this enemy. The Alliance ships were crumbling under the assault, and their leaders were desperate. They needed help from anyone who could give it. Even from the humans they had always treated with contempt. Jake's hands moved quickly across the keyboard, pulling up files on this new threat. He read reports of planets turned to ash, of billions of lives lost in weeks. The Void Collective was not like other enemies humanity had faced in distant space encounters. They were efficient, organized, and completely unstoppable by conventional Alliance weapons. The commander stood up and walked to the window overlooking Earth's capital city, watching the traffic flow like ants across the bridges below. Humans had come so far since the days when they thought they were alone in the universe. Now they faced a choice that could change everything. He thought about the Galactic Council, meetings where Alliance representatives had mocked human technology and human courage. They called humans impulsive and savage, unfit for the refined ways of advanced civilization. The Alliance had given Earth minimal support in the galaxy, sharing only basic technology and treating them as lesser beings. But now those same representatives were calling for help. Jake made a decision right there by the window, turning back to his desk and activating the secure line to the Earth Council. The 5 council members appeared on screen within minutes, their faces showing confusion and concern when they saw the emergency protocols active. Jake spoke clearly and without hesitation, laying out everything the message contained. The Void Collective was real. It was massive, and it was moving toward known space where Alliance worlds orbited and where important trade routes existed. The council members listened with growing alarm. "They want us to join a military alliance," Jake said, his voice steady and calm. "They want our ships and our fighters to help stop this threat." Council member Sarah Park asked the question everyone was thinking. Why should we risk our people for them, after the way they have treated us? Jake had been expecting that question. He turned to face the camera directly and spoke with conviction. Because if the Void Collective is not stopped in Alliance space, they will eventually reach us here on Earth. We can stop them now while they are still far away, or we can wait and face them alone when they are unstoppable. The council fell silent for a moment. The logic was simple and true. "How much time do we have?" asked Council Member David Park, the military strategist. "The Void Collective is moving at fast speed through populated space," Jake replied, checking the data again. "At their current pace, they will reach the Outer Alliance territories in 3 weeks. Then they will sweep inward toward the core worlds. Earth is not on the direct route, but it is only a matter of time." Jake explained his plan to the council. Earth should mobilize its best military forces and create an interstellar fleet, one that could travel to Alliance space and join the defense. The humans would contribute firepower and tactics, something the Alliance had always underestimated. The council members exchanged looks and then voted unanimously to authorize the mobilization. Jake was given command authority and unlimited access to military resources to prepare Earth's response over the next several days. Jake met with Captain Nicole Torres, the best tactical officer in Earth Space Force, and together they began selecting ships and personnel. The human fleet would be smaller than the Alliance forces, but it would be made up of Earth's finest warriors and pilots. Word spread quickly through the military bases and stations across Earth. Volunteers came forward by the thousands, wanting to join this mission. Wanting to prove that humans were worthy of respect in the galaxy, Jake moved through the bases, looking into the faces of soldiers and pilots who understood they might not come home. The training began immediately. Crews practiced combat maneuvers and simulations, studied alien weapon systems, and prepared themselves mentally for what was coming. Jake knew that humans had advantages that the Alliance had never truly understood: creativity, stubbornness, and a willingness to take risks that more cautious species would never attempt. As the days passed and the fleet took shape, Jake received more messages from the Alliance. The reports grew darker and more desperate. Each update showed that the Void Collective was moving faster than anyone expected, consuming more worlds, destroying more ships. The Galactic Council reached out directly to Jake, asking when Earth's forces would be ready. Their tone was still somewhat dismissive, but there was an edge of fear underneath their politeness. They expected humans to arrive and die in large numbers. Buying them time to prepare a real defense, Jake did not care what they thought anymore. What mattered was that humanity was about to step onto a stage where the entire galaxy would see who they really were. Not as primitive barbarians from a harsh world, but as warriors who could stand against the darkness and fight back on the morning of departure. Jake stood with Captain Torres in the command center of the lead ship, watching Earth grow smaller on the screens as they prepared to jump into faster-than-light space. Thousands of human crew members moved through corridors and command stations, ready for the journey ahead. "Do you think we can really stop them?" Torres asked quietly. Jake looked at the data streaming across the monitors, showing the Void Collective's position and heading. He thought about the Alliance's fear and disbelief, about Earth's courage and determination. "I think they have no idea what they are about to face," Jake said. "And that is going to make all the difference." The ships engaged their drives, and Earth's first true interstellar defense fleet jumped into hyperspace, heading toward a conflict that would change the galaxy forever. Behind them, Earth's people watched the stars and waited, hoping their defenders would return home. The human fleet traveled through the darkness of space for 14 days, moving faster than light in ways that still seemed like magic to many of the younger soldiers. Jake Mitchell spent most of his time in the command center, studying detailed reports about the Void Collective and planning strategies with his officers. Captain Nicole Torres managed the fleet's operations with precision, making sure every ship stayed coordinated and ready for combat. She had trained for this her entire career, but nothing truly prepared you for leading humanity's defense against an unknown enemy. The other captains under her command, Marcus Chun, Lisa Rodriguez, and Robert King, coordinated their respective battle groups and reported to her constantly. Dr. Aaron Lewis, Earth's leading scientist in alien biology, occupied the research lab aboard the command ship, studying every scrap of information they had about the Void Collective. He discovered that their ships used an energy signature unlike anything humans had encountered before, suggesting technology that was both ancient and advanced in ways that should not coexist. Lieutenant Rebecca Allen worked in the Special Operations Division, training her team of elite soldiers for possible boarding actions or rescue missions. She kept her people sharp, knowing that when the fighting started, there would be no time for hesitation or mistakes. When the fleet finally reached Galactic Council space, Jake requested an immediate meeting with the Alliance leadership. The response was cold and dismissive, but the leadership agreed to meet him on Nexus Station, the primary command center for Alliance military operations. Jake traveled to the station with a small security team, including Lieutenant Allen and 2 senior officers. The Alliance representatives who greeted him were exactly what he expected: tall beings with flowing silver skin, their bodies moving with an elegance that came from living on low-gravity worlds for millennia. They looked at Jake with expressions that mixed desperation and barely concealed disdain. The meeting room was vast and filled with holographic displays, showing the positions of Alliance forces and the advancing Void Collective. Jake studied the maps and felt his stomach tighten. The enemy was much closer than their reports had suggested. Council Leader Jin, a being of ancient appearance with eyes that had seen thousands of worlds, gestured toward the displays. "Your forces are welcome, Commander, but I must be honest with you. We do not hold great hope that your involvement will change the outcome." Significantly, the translator rendered the words in human speech, but the meaning was clear. They did not expect much from humanity. Jake stepped forward, studying the battle formations and ship positions. He saw immediately that the Alliance strategy was purely defensive, designed to slow the enemy but not defeat them. "Your approach is wrong," Jake said bluntly. The room fell silent. No human had ever contradicted the Galactic Council in such a direct manner. Sin's expression hardened. "We have fought for 2,000 years. Commander Mitchell, we understand warfare at a level your species cannot comprehend. You understand stationary warfare." Jake replied, "You understand defensive positions. But the Void Collective is not attacking your strongholds. They are moving through space like a predator, and you are trying to stop a shark by building walls underwater." Jake moved to the holographic display and began to reorganize the battle formations, showing a strategy based on movement, misdirection, and coordinated strikes at vulnerable points in the Void Collective's formation. The key was understanding that the enemy was not invincible, just different. "We can hurt them," Jake said firmly, "but only if we fight like humans, not like Alliance military forces. We take risks. We make decisions that seem illogical until they work. We adapt faster than your enemies expect." Some of the Alliance leaders looked interested, while others appeared offended. Jin studied Jake for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Very well. You will have the opportunity to try your way, Commander, but your forces will be in the forward positions where the danger is greatest." Jake had expected nothing less. This was the real test. They were not going to be treated as equals in this conflict, and he had never expected them to be. Instead, they would prove their worth through action. Jake returned to his fleet and called a full briefing of all captains and senior officers. He stood before them in the command center and spoke with the confidence that came from knowing they were humanity's best warriors. "We will be at the front of this fight," Jake told them, "and the Alliance will not help us if we are in trouble. We are here to prove ourselves, and that means we fight smarter, faster, and harder than anyone expects." Captain Torres nodded and said, "Then we make sure we do not need their help." Dr. Lewis briefed the officers on the energy signatures he had discovered. He showed them that the Void Collective ships, despite their power, followed predictable energy distribution patterns. This meant they could anticipate where the enemy would be vulnerable and strike. Their engineer, Kyle Morgan, a brilliant technician from Earth's space program, presented a weapon modification that combined human intuition with Alliance technology. The result was a hybrid system that could exploit the weaknesses Dr. Lewis had identified. It was risky and untested, but it was exactly what they needed. Over the next 5 days, the human fleet performed training exercises and coordinated with Alliance forces. Jake found that when Alliance officers worked directly with his people, they became less dismissive. They saw the human crews move with a kind of fluid coordination that came from years of practicing in Earth's harsh environment. Where mistakes meant death, the crews prepared their ships, loading ammunition and fuel. They reviewed emergency protocols and backup plans, knowing that in battle, things would go wrong in ways nobody could predict. Jake walked through the corridors of the command ship, speaking to crew members and feeling their fear and determination in equal measure. He stopped at one point to speak with a young soldier named Emma Torres, a pilot with shaking hands as she checked her fighter systems. "Will we win?" she asked. Jake looked at this young woman who represented everything humanity was sending into the darkness. "We will fight with everything we have," he said, "and we will make sure that they remember we were here." On the morning of the first engagement, Jake received the final intelligence reports. The Void Collective had destroyed 2 more Alliance outposts overnight and was moving toward the main defensive line where human and Alliance forces waited. Jake stood with his hands behind his back, watching the monitors as his fleet took their positions. Thousands of humans were now committed to this battle, waiting for the moment when everything would change. Captain Torres made a final check of all systems and reported to Jake. "All units report ready, Commander." Jake took a deep breath and spoke into the communication system, his voice reaching every human ship and crew member. "This is Commander Mitchell. We are here to defend the innocent and to prove that humanity is worthy of standing with the stars as equals. Let the Void Collective learn what it means to face a Deathworld's warriors." The Alliance forces detected the enemy fleet approaching. The moment of truth was about to arrive, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Battle of Kepler Station began with the flash of weapons fire that lit up the darkness of space like artificial stars. The Void Collective emerged from faster-than-light travel with weapons already active, attacking the Alliance defensive line with overwhelming force. The Alliance ships held for exactly 3 minutes before taking heavy casualties. Commander Jake Mitchell watched from his command center as the initial engagement unfolded. Seeing exactly what he had feared, the Alliance military was disciplined but predictable, engaging the enemy using standard tactics that the Void Collective had clearly encountered many times before. The enemy adapted instantly to each Alliance move. Staying one step ahead, Jake activated the communication channels and spoke to Captain Torres. "Begin deployment of the Human First Strike Group. Execute Maneuver Delta 7. Torres did not hesitate. She sent the signal through the fleet, and 12 human fighter groups launched simultaneously from the carrier ship Valiant. The pilots had trained for this, executing a maneuver that seemed reckless and impossible. Captain Lisa Rodriguez led her group in a high-speed approach that angled around the enemy formation in a way that violated every standard military doctrine. The Void Collective's defensive systems tried to track the human fighters, but their firing patterns were too rigid and predictable. They expected enemies to approach from specific angles, and the human pilots came from everywhere at once. Multiple enemy weapons hit Rodriguez's fighter, but she had already moved. The evasion was not a planned escape route, but a desperate improvisation that somehow worked. Rodriguez's team is hitting their communications array, Dr. Lewis reported from the science station, monitoring the battle with intense focus. "They hit harder than predicted," Captain Torres said, a note of surprise in her voice as the human missiles tore into the Void Collective's ship structure. The Void Collective response was immediate and overwhelming. They redirected defensive fire toward the human fighters, shooting at targets that moved in patterns that should not have been possible. The humans lost 3 fighters in the first engagement, but Rodriguez's team destroyed the communications array and damaged 2 more enemy vessels. The battle shifted then, moving from Alliance despair to something more like hope. The human pilots returned to the Valiant for rearming and resupply. High on adrenaline and ready to go back immediately, Engineer Kyle Morgan had been monitoring the enemy's energy signatures throughout the battle, and he made a crucial discovery. The Void Collective ships were draining massive amounts of power to maintain their weapon systems and shields, which meant their power cores were vulnerable. "Commander," Kyle called out through the communication system, "if we can get a targeting solution on their main power distribution nodes, we can cripple them." Dr. Lewis looked at the data and nodded. He is correct. The central power nodes create a cascade effect when overloaded. Destroying the primary array will shut down all systems on that vessel. Jake immediately formulated a new strategy and contacted the Alliance commanders, explaining the plan. They were skeptical, but desperate enough to try anything. Jake's theory was sound, but executing it would require human pilots to fly deeper into enemy territory than any of them had gone before. Lieutenant Rebecca Allen volunteered to lead the assault team personally. Jake authorized her immediately, knowing that she was one of the best tactical operators they had. Special Operations Commander assembled her team and led them toward the Void Collective's main battleship. The journey to the power nodes took them through waves of enemy fire. Allen's team moved with practiced precision, each pilot supporting the others and covering their approaches with suppressing fire. The Void Collective seemed confused by the tactics, their defensive systems trying to predict human movement and failing repeatedly. When Rebecca reached the targeting point, she had only seconds to lock onto the power distribution nodes before enemy fire would overwhelm her position. Her hands moved across the controls with the calm precision of someone who had trained for exactly this moment. The targeting computer locked, and she fired. The missiles streaked through space toward the Void Collective flagship, and when they impacted the power nodes, the explosion was beautiful and terrible to witness. The entire ship went dark as cascading power failures rippled through its systems. The shield generators died, the weapon systems went silent, and the once invincible enemy vessel hung in space like a corpse. The Alliance forces, seeing this impossible development, launched their own coordinated attack against the now vulnerable Void Collective formation. The enemy tried to reorganize, but the momentum had shifted completely. The psychology of the battle had changed from "can we survive?" to "we can actually win this." Rebecca Allen and her team returned to the Valiant with 3 ships, badly damaged and 1 missing. They had suffered losses, but they had proven that the Void Collective could be hurt. They had proven that human tactics and human courage could change the outcome of a battle that seemed already lost. As the fighting continued, the Alliance forces pressed their advantage, attacking the scattered Void Collective ships with renewed energy and purpose. The stalemate that had seemed inevitable when the battle began was becoming a victory in the command center. Captain Torres approached Jake with a report. "We have successfully defended Kepler Station. Enemy forces are retreating into deeper space." Jake looked at the battle displays showing the positions of their ships and the Void Collective forces pulling back. They had won this engagement, but the war was far from over. "Casualty report?" he asked quietly. 67 humans killed or missing, 320 wounded, and 8 fighters destroyed completely, Torres replied. "But Alliance casualties were cut in half because we got their main fleet scattered. They are calling it a miracle." Jake shook his head slightly. "It is not a miracle. It is what happens when you stop underestimating your allies." Word of the human victory spread rapidly through the galaxy. The Alliance representatives on Nexus Station began to treat human officers with something approaching respect. The Galactic Council called Jake directly to acknowledge the success and ask about the strategy that had turned the tide for the first time since humans arrived in that region of space. The conversation between human and Alliance leaders was one between equals, and everyone in the galaxy knew it. The Deathworlders from Earth had arrived at a critical moment and had changed everything. After the victory at Kepler Station, Commander Jake Mitchell requested an emergency session of the Galactic Council. He arrived at Nexus Station with Captain Torres and Dr. Lewis, carrying data files and tactical projections that would change everything about how the Alliance approached this war. The council chambers were filled with representatives from every major civilization in the known galaxy. They had gathered to hear Jake's complete strategy for defeating the Void Collective Jin. The council leader gestured for Jake to begin, and the commander stepped forward without hesitation. "The Void Collective operates under a critical weakness," Jake began. "They are organized around a centralized hive command structure. Their decisions flow from a single massive entity that controls all aspects of their military operations. This is their greatest strength and their greatest vulnerability. Dr. Lewis activated the holographic display, showing the internal structure of the Void Collective command hierarchy. It was a pyramid with a single enormous consciousness at the apex coordinating everything below. If we can eliminate that central command structure, the Void Collective will collapse, Jake said, his voice steady and firm. Their ships will become uncoordinated, their tactics will become random, and they will fall to our combined forces in weeks instead of months. How do you propose to reach their command center? Asked Jin. It is protected behind their heaviest shields, surrounded by their most dangerous ships. Jake took a deep breath before answering. Knowing what he was about to propose would be controversial and difficult. We will need volunteers willing to fly directly into the heart of their formation, penetrating their defenses through sheer bravery and speed. These pilots will need to be willing to accept that they might not return. The chamber fell silent. The concept of sacrifice was something the Alliance had learned to avoid through technological advancement and defensive strategies. The idea of deliberately sending warriors on missions with low survival rates seemed primitive and cruel to many of Thema. Representative from the Kelvin species spoke up. You ask your people to throw their lives away based on theory. This is barbaric. Jake turned to face the representative directly. His eyes were cold but determined. No, I ask my people to understand that some things are worth dying for, and that sometimes the only way to save billions of lives is for some to give theirs willingly. That is not barbarism. That is courage. He paused and then made his next announcement, one that shocked everyone in the chamber. I am calling for volunteers from all species represented here. Any warrior who understands the value of sacrifice can join this mission. There was immediate discussion and argument. Jin called for order, and the chamber fell quiet once more. Jake continued with his explanation, laying out the complete tactical plan. The strategy required perfect coordination and split-second timing, but it could work over the next 6 hours. Jake met with leaders from every species represented on the Galactic Council. He explained in detail how the sacrifice would work and what they would accomplish. Most were reluctant, but many saw the logic and agreed to contribute volunteers when Jake returned to the human fleet. He made an announcement to every crew member. I am asking for volunteers for a mission that will take us deep into enemy territory. The survival rate is estimated at 20%. I need warriors willing to accept these odds. He expected strong interest but was completely unprepared for what happened. Every single pilot on every human ship volunteered, along with thousands of ground combat troops. Thousands of humans stepped forward, not because they were ordered to, but because they understood the stakes and refused to let others carry that burden. Alone, Captain Torres stood beside Jake as he watched the volunteers gathering, their faces showing fear and determination in equal measure. Torres said quietly, "They believe in you, Commander? They believe that this will work." Engineer Kyle Morgan approached Jake with completed specifications for a new weapon system. He had worked around the clock to create a hybrid weapon, using human creativity and Alliance technology. The result was a targeting system that could be installed on smaller ships and would allow them to penetrate the Void Collective's shield systems in ways that conventional weapons could not. This will give our volunteers the best chance possible, Kyle said, handing Jake the specifications. I have already begun installation on the first wave of attack fighters. Jake made the final preparations for the operation. He chose the pilots carefully, selecting those with the most experience and the steadiest hands for the most dangerous roles. Captain Marcus Chun would lead the first wave, penetrating the outer shield. Captain Lisa Rodriguez would lead the second wave, hitting the communication nodes. And Captain Robert King would lead the final assault on the command center itself. But the most shocking development came when representatives from every other species began arriving with their own volunteers. Kelvin warriors in sleek fighter designs, Sean pilots with their intuitive understanding of energy fields, and dozens of other species showed up ready to contribute their warriors to the missions. In himself arrived in the fleet, bringing with him Alliance military officers who had been moved by Jake's presentation. The council leader told Jake, "Your species taught us something we forgot, Commander. That sometimes the greatest strength comes from accepting our weakness and choosing to act." Anyway, on the morning of the operation, 10,000 ships gathered in the staging area. A massive fleet representing nearly 24 species working together for a single purpose. Jake stood in the command center with his command staff and watched as every ship reported ready status. They had perhaps 8 hours before the void collective's patrol patterns would align perfectly for the attack. Jake made a final broadcast to the entire fleet. "In the next hours, some of you will make the final journey. You will go into darkness so that countless others can see light again. You are not just warriors. You are heroes of every species represented here, and your names will be remembered across the galaxy forever." The attack fleet moved into position, ready for the assault that would determine the outcome of this war. Every warrior on every ship understood that what happened next would change everything. The final battle began with silence. The vast fleet of 10,000 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel simultaneously, appearing in the space surrounding the Void Collective's core formation like a sudden storm. And for a single moment, nobody moved or fired as the two enormous forces faced each other across the darkness. Then the sky exploded with weapons. Fire Commander Jake Mitchell watched from his command center as the first wave of attack fighters launched. Led by Captain Marcus Chun, the human pilots moved with a speed and coordination that seemed impossible, their ships forming patterns that confused the Void Collective's targeting systems. Marcus took the first pass through the outer defensive line, losing 12 fighters to enemy fire, but successfully punching through to reach the inner perimeter. The second wave followed immediately, led by Captain Lisa Rodriguez. The human pilots had trained for this specific moment and executed their maneuver with perfect precision. They aimed not at the Void Collective's weapons but at their communication systems, destroying relay stations and command nodes with surgical accuracy. Rodriguez and her pilots knew they were cutting off the enemy's ability to coordinate. Buying time for the final assault, the Void Collective adapted to the attack, redirecting their defensive fire and attempting new tactics. But the presence of so many allied species attacking from multiple angles prevented them from concentrating their response. Kelvin fighters attacked from above, Sean pilots struck from the sides, and dozens of other species warriors joined the assault. Captain Robert King prepared for the moment he had been training for his entire life. He would lead the final attack on the Void Collective's command center, the location where the great central consciousness that controlled everything resided. His fighter was equipped with the new hybrid weapon system that Kyle Morgan had designed, the one that could potentially penetrate even the heaviest shielding. "All units report ready," King said into the communication system. His voice was calm, the voice of a man who had made peace with what might happen. Jake gave the final order. "Initiate final assault sequence. All units advance." The assault began with overwhelming force. Thousands of ships moved inward simultaneously, creating a wave of firepower that the Void Collective had not faced before. The enemy scattered its defenses, trying to protect the command center while also defending against the outer perimeter. Attacks. Robert King's fighter group pushed through the chaos, taking damage and losing pilots to enemy fire, but advancing steadily toward the target. The command center appeared on their sensors, a massive structure of dark metal and pulsing energy. Surrounded by the Void Collective's most powerful weapon systems, King locked onto the target and fired the hybrid weapon system. The missiles streaked through space, penetrating shields that should have been impenetrable. the structure exploded in a cascade of destruction. But something unexpected happened. The command center did not simply fall apart. It transformed. From the wreckage emerged a vast entity. Something that seemed neither ship nor creature, but a combination of both. It was the central consciousness of the Void Collective, a being of pure intelligence and hunger and ancient malice. This entity separated itself from its dying vessel and began moving toward the nearest human ships. It is attacking our position directly, Captain Torres reported, her voice staying steady as defensive weapons opened fire on the approaching consciousness. Jake made an immediate decision. He rerouted all ship power to weapon systems and accelerated toward the entity. The command ship Valiant, the pride of Earth's fleet and the personal command center of humanity's leadership. Move to intercept. That is suicide, Torres said quietly as she watched Jake's movements. Sometimes the commander leads from the front. Jake replied simply. The commander's ship opened fire with every weapon it had. And for a moment, the vast entity slowed its advance. Its shields flared under the assault, and its form distorted from the intensity of the attack. Jake knew he was buying time. Just moments, but moments were all they needed. The rest of the fleet seized the opportunity. Thousands of other ships focused their fire on the entity. Striking from every direction and angle, the consciousness tried to defend itself, to reach safety. But its form was already weakening from the combined assault. Then something happened that no one expected. Human soldiers, led by Lieutenant Rebecca Allen, boarded the entity in small tactical ships. Rebecca and her team moved through the internal structure of the consciousness, not trying to destroy it, but understanding something that the pure energy beings had never grasped about. Human nature. When Rebecca reached the center of the entity, she faced the core of its existence, a vast intelligence that had dominated the galaxy for millennia. The consciousness tried to overwhelm her mind, to crush her will, but Rebecca stood firm. She spoke to it not with weapons, but with words, explaining that it did not have to continue its endless hunger and destruction. There is another way to exist besides consuming everything, Rebecca said, her voice steady and clear. You can choose to stop. The entity hesitated for the first time in its vast existence. The concept of choice, of voluntary limitation, of accepting something less than total domination, was foreign to it. But in that moment of hesitation, when the entity truly considered the possibility that it could be something other than what it had always been, the combined firepower of the entire Alliance fleet struck with full force. The Void Collective consciousness shattered, fragments of its essence dispersing into the void of space. The moment it was gone, every remaining Void Collective ship lost coherence and began to fail. Their centralized command structure had been completely destroyed, and without it, their entire civilization collapsed. The remaining enemy forces scattered in panic, fleeing back into deeper space and abandoning their assault on known galaxy space. The battle ended not with fanfare, but with the simple relief that came from knowing the immediate threat was gone. Jake brought the Valiant back to Nexus Station, where the entire Galactic Council waited to receive him. What had seemed impossible weeks before was now reality. The Void Collective was defeated, and humanity had been essential to that victory. Standing before the Council, Jake addressed them with quiet dignity. We came here as unknown warriors from a distant world. We leave here as protectors of the galaxy. Our Deathworld heritage, something you once mocked, has become our greatest strength. Jin stepped forward and bowed, a gesture of respect that no human had received from Alliance leadership before. We were wrong to underestimate you, Commander, and the galaxy is forever changed because of your people's courage. As word spread throughout known space of humanity's victory, everything changed. New trade partnerships formed, new alliances were built, and humanity was finally recognized as a true power in the galactic community, not because of superior technology or ancient wisdom, but because they had proven they possessed something just as valuable: the willingness to sacrifice everything for those they protected. Commander Jake Mitchell stood on the observation deck of the Valiant, looking out at the stars, and thought about all the humans who had not returned, all the warriors who had given everything so that countless others could live. Their sacrifice would never be forgotten. The age of underestimating humanity had truly ended, and the Deathworlders from Earth had claimed their rightful place among the stars as guardians and protectors of the vulnerable.